Ever since Tesla came out with the Yoke steering wheel on the refreshed Model S and X, the Yoke steering wheel has been a hot topic of debate. Is it a master stroke of Elon's genius? Or was it just an impulse bad decision just to make cars look more futuristic? Well, I ran a highly scientific poll on X and the results were mixed, with the Yoke is bad category squeaking out the win, but with only 42% of the total vote. That leaves the majority in either the pro-Yoke or the undecided camp. Now, if you're watching this video, odds are that you either own a Tesla or you're interested in a Tesla, and you might be thinking to yourself, should I get a Yoke? My job is to figure that out so you don't have to, and when we are done, you should be able to confidently make the decision for yourself whether a Yoke is right for you. Now, when it comes to the Yoke Mind virus, let's just say I'm a centrist, an independent voter, if you will, on the topic. I didn't love it. I didn't hate it either. So when my friends at Hand Show reached out to me and offered to send me this Yoke steering wheel to try out, I jumped at the chance, because when making any rational decision, it's good to do your research and not simply pass judgment from the sideline, never giving it a go for yourself. For me, I asked them to send me a Yoke that was as close to the factory X and S Yoke steering wheel as possible, and that's what I got. As you can see, it looks pretty factory and even has the shape of the X and S Yokes. This particular Yoke is something relatively new for Model Ys and Model 3s, even though third-party Yokes have been out for quite some time. This Yoke comes in all kinds of colors, materials, and options, and you can check this out for yourself in the link below. And installing this Yoke was pretty straightforward, and I'll cover that later in the video. But for now, let's jump into answering the burning question, does the Yoke suck? I've had this Yoke installed in my car for a number of weeks, and I really wanted to live with it and use it as much as possible, and I've come to a number of conclusions about the Yoke. Even though the round wheel and the Yoke perform the same basic function in the car, comparing them directly is more like comparing apples to oranges than just two different kinds of apples. On many levels, they are quite different, and in my opinion, the Yoke clearly wins in a few categories, so let's talk about them. First, I have full self-driving, and I do a lot of road tripping. I will say that the Yoke makes it much easier to acknowledge the autopilot nag due to the rectangular shape of the Yoke. Now, when I road trip, I don't want to pay attention to the nag. I don't want to have to deal with it, so I want to put enough pressure on the steering wheel to keep it from ever popping up. That way I can pay attention to other things like the road. The Yoke's shape makes this super easy, and all you need is the weight of a few fingers. I know this is a first world problem, but putting constant torque on a round wheel over the course of an entire day really wears on you, and with the Yoke, gravity is your friend. Think of it like holding onto a vertical pole all day instead of resting your hand on a horizontal pole. The next win for the Yoke has to be the view. The Yoke eliminates the top portion of the wheel and completely opens up the field of view in front of you. I think this is nice, but I will admit that unless you have something to look at like a front display screen like it on the S or the X or some other aftermarket screen, the benefit is probably less. Also for the win is the coolness factor. I have to at least acknowledge it. I don't know if it's because I grew up in the days of Knight Rider or if it just feels like something from science fiction. It does appeal to the geeky kid in me. Next, let's move to a category that I'll just say things that are different. There are aspects of the Yoke that are, in my opinion, aren't better than the wheel, but they're definitely different than the wheel. The biggest feedback I got on X when talking about the Yoke was that you needed to get used to it. At first, I thought that was just a cop-out answer. However, after a few weeks, I kind of get it. When making turns on the Yoke, you need to hold the Yoke differently than the wheel. There are things that simply don't work with the Yoke, like letting it slip through your fingers when you come out of a turn. With the Yoke, you tend to use the bottom corners and your palms to allow the Yoke to spin in both directions. The motion feels like those rifle twirlers that you would see at marching bands in a football game. And I can confidently say that you can 100% make smooth, safe turns with the Yoke once you adjust how you use it. For the Tesla owners out there, this process is very similar to getting used to one-pedal driving. With one-pedal driving, you don't coast. You don't use the brakes. You just slowly lift up on your right foot, to slow the car down and stop. And I also bet that you found yourself actually pressing the accelerator pedal down to accelerate into a full stop to prevent the car from slowing down too quickly. Now, when you describe it that way, it sounds weird. However, in the car, it feels much more natural once you get used to it. The same is true for the yoke. You need to retrain yourself on how and where you hold your hands and how you use your hands while driving. Now, the yoke isn't perfect and it still has some downsides in my opinion, so let's talk about them. First, where the yoke is great when using FSD and acknowledging the nag, it is difficult to grab on when you actually need to break out of FSD, especially in the middle of a turn. When a car is in town and making turns all by itself, it's simply better to keep your hands off the yoke and let it do its thing. You can keep your hands at the ready, but if you need to grab onto that moving yoke rectangle, that can certainly be a challenge. I also still find the yoke to be cumbersome when maneuvering the car in a parking lot at very low speeds. Now, when the car is going very slowly, it takes more force to turn the wheel, in my opinion. For me, this requires hand over hand movement. And in order to use hand over hand, I still need to use my peripheral vision to know where to grab on the yoke. And when you're in a parking lot situation, looking all around, this motion can be tricky. Now, with my operational opinions out of the way, I think it's now a good time to talk about some other concerns people have had with the idea of a yoke. First, does it void the warranty of the car? And how does the yoke impact the safety of the airbag? Let me first address the warranty issue first. Simply put, this won't void your warranty. Clearly, they won't cover any damage to the yoke if you damage the yoke in some way. However, many people on X have used third-party yokes for a very long time and have commented that it has never impacted their ability to get service for their car or voided any warranty of your car other than the steering wheel. As for the airbag, this yoke uses the factory wheel's airbag module. The entire center of the yoke comes from the factory Tesla wheel and it plugs directly into the car. The yoke does not touch anything associated with the airbag at all. And as for the airbag support itself, they are identical to the stock wheel, as you can see here. Now, if you stuck around this far and you'd like to see what it takes to install a yoke like this in your Model 3 or Model Y, let me take you through that process now. Now, in theory, this steering wheel should just be a one-to-one swap with the new yoke steering wheel. So it's just a matter of getting it off and getting the new one on. There shouldn't be a matter of actually swapping any parts. So how do you get this thing off? Well, the first thing that I would recommend is powering off your car, although you're going to find the car will basically want to power itself back on from time to time. The next thing you're going to need are two small screwdrivers. In my case, I've got two really thin Allen head wrenches here, and there are two small holes on either side of the back side of the steering wheel, and if you push these in to that location, it will cause some springs to allow the airbag system to pop out, at least in theory. So let's go ahead and do that. Oh, and there we go. Right, this will just come off, and inside here are a couple of connectors, and we want to very carefully remove the yellow connector by pushing it on each side of that yellow connector with a screwdriver or something. So you need to be careful. This is where the airbag systems are, and we'll get that done now. Right. Airbag is out, and we'll set this aside. Right, now that we have this out, we have another control cable that we need to disconnect. It's also got the same type of connection where you need to press both sides in order to make it open. Take your time, it will pull out, just be careful with it. At this point, you're probably going to start seeing a lot of alerts on the car like this. This is normal, just because everything is unplugged. So the next step is to get this bolt out, and for what I've been told, this is the hardest part of the process. It requires a 10mm hex bolt here and a large wrench. So let's go ahead and see if we can get this steering wheel off. Okay, I have my large torque wrench with an extender because you do need to get a little bit of a distance. You don't want to mar up your steering wheel. And I have a 10mm hex head bolt here. And let's just see if we can get this bad boy off. I did notice that when the car was in park, the steering wheel wanted to turn. It was really hard. So I remembered from past experience that when you're charging, it locks the steering wheel. So maybe that's going to help me get this loosened up here. There we go. All right, there's our bolt. Now it should be a matter of just wiggling the steering wheel until it comes off, just like that. Our steering wheel is now off and we're ready to insert the yoke. Now it's time to mount the steering wheel here. And before we get too ahead of ourselves, I'll go ahead and plug this in. That's a good sign. And don't worry about the gap. As we screw this down, it will pull down as far as it needs to go. All right, based on what I can tell online, that we need to torque this bolt to 59 foot-pounds. All right, there we go. All that's left now is to install this. Now, Hansho did provide a replacement cover with this, and they may choose to put that cover on at some point, but getting that cover on requires some finagling and also some perhaps destroying the original factory cover. I'm okay with the cover as it is, so I'm going to leave that as is. So we're going to start by reinserting the airbag and lining this up. Now it's going to honk. Okay, the yoke is installed. The yoke isn't perfect, and I don't think that there's a clear winner here between the yoke and the round wheel. It really comes down to personal preference and how much you appreciate the pros and how much you don't mind the cons. If you decide this yoke is right for you, this yoke from Hansho is a good place to start, as it is a one-to-one direct swap with the factory wheel. Also, if you do decide to purchase a yoke of your own, use the checkout code IOWATESLAGUY to save between 15 and 20% on your order. Hit me up in the comments below. What do you think of the yoke? Good? Bad? Indifferent? Did this video change your mind? I'd love to hear from you. Thanks so much for watching, and we'll catch you on the next one.